2008 was a landmark year for vampires, with Twilight hitting the theaters. But to me, the much more important vampires were the Bionicle Makutas. Antroz chief among them was the coolest toy on the shelves. Who doesn't love an edgy robot vampire? Although the original set isn't quite robotic enough for my tastes. Today, let's fix that and redesign Antroz. Starting from his awesome mask, I really want to lean into the cyberpunk details with my revamp. To start that, let's give him some cybernetic eyes. This ladybug part might do the trick. If I cover up the ladybug's eyes, its shell could make for some really cool cybernetic implants. Now, the fun part is figuring out how to attach the eyes to the mask. For that, I'll start with a trusty snot brick, which I can add 2 ladybugs to. Then I'll use a few clips to attach it at a bit of an angle. A quick test fit, and the eyes are looking good. To build up the connection to the mask, I'll use some plates and a Technic brick, which I can use with this axle. Then I can attach this triaxle to give myself a neck connection point. Finally, this connector can attach to the mask. There's still a few details I'd like to add. The first is some purple under the eyes, which I can connect in with this staff hilt and a pair of clips. It is funny how silly the head looks without a mask. To add to that a bit more, I'll connect this tire around his mouth before building up a Bionicle brain stalk with these red slopes. Let's attach that mask and then add a few more cyberpunk details with some cables coming out the back of his head. With that done, it's time to build up some vampiric wings. Antroz originally came with these unique wing parts, which I want to use here as an homage to the original set. Let's combine several of them here to make a larger wing. I'll start that process with an angled Technic beam, which I can connect the wing to. For the second wing part to attach, I'll use a few more pins. Then, the third wing can connect to the existing lightsaber rod. For the wing arm, is that what you call it? I'm going to start off with this Hero Factory bone, which I'll beef up with some tires. Then, I'll add a socket to a bar. To that, I'll build up an assembly of rod ends and robot hands, which I can cap off with a spike. I'll connect the 2 wing sections, and then bend the wing structure into place to finish off the wings. With that done, it's time to move on to building up the arms. I'll start off the arms with a stopper axle and a ball joint, then add a large cone and finally a socket. For bicep armor, I'll add a bar and then a Hero Factory shell. On the forearm, I'll start with another socket, which I can add some detailed Technic bits to. I'll use this tire for a bit more detail. We can then further armor the forearm with some hexagons. A bit more detail that I can add in is this decorative piston built from a pneumatic T and a rod end. I can attach that in here and swing it around to finish off the elbow joint. I'll add a little more mechanical detail so that the forearm doesn't look so thin. I'd also like to add a bit more to the front of the arm, but since I'm out of connections, I'm going to add in a minifigure neck bracket so that I can attach this binocular part. Now let's connect the 2 arm halves together. I think some more cyberpunk cables are in order. I can attach these whip parts to the binoculars, and then, to attach the other end, I'll build up a little assembly of connectors. I'll pin that to the tricep, and then connect the cables into it. Up next, we can build up some creepy vampire claws, starting with a socket plate and this bar plate, which will be perfect for attaching the fingers to. Here, I'll add some droid arms. Then rod ends can hold the spiky nails. Let's add a bracket for the thumb, and armor the back of the hand with a cheese slope and a tile. Then, a tire around the wrist can hide the gray socket before adding a clip, so I can attach in Antroz's thumb. Now, with the hand done, I can attach it in to the rest of our arm. And what good would these creepy hands be if we didn't give them some mean looking blades for Antroz to hold. I'll start off with his classic blades, to which I'll add a handle using some connectors. I'll fill in one of the connectors with these rubber doodahs, and then add a clip to the other connector to attach in to the hands. Antroz has 2 of these blades, but I like the idea that they are subtly different from one another. For that detail, I'm going to use a gold minifigure torso armor and a tan barb on one blade. Then, for a different look on the second blade, I'll use this futuristic minifigure armor, a printed tile, and an inkwell. I really like that these are subtly different, and that it adds a bit of implied history to Antroz. Up next, let's build a torso for Antroz. For his chest, I have this cool crane claw part that I want to use. I think the 2 of them make for quite the cool look. The only issue is how to connect them at the proper angle relative to one another. To solve this problem, I'm turning to a number of angled Technic connectors. It's important to always hide pesky red pins in the places you can't see them. I'll connect both to a lift arm and swing them into place. Next up, because I want to make my life just a little harder, I'm thinking these armored plates would be perfect here. To attach them, I'm going to build up another Technic monstrosity, starting with this angled connector, and then attaching a bunch of axles and lift arms. I'll add a second angled connector for strength. To set the angle of the armor plates, I'll add some pins and connect in another pair of angles, which can position the armor just so. To connect them together, I'll do some minor surgery and trap the 2 assemblies together. We'll connect them properly later on, I think. For now, I'm not too worried that they'll fall apart. Next, I'll adorn this axle with some connectors in order to attach an orange bullrock eye and fill in this hole in the torso. The Makutas had this fun gimmick of launching a pod full of light leeches, which I want to make sure I include here. For such an iconic feature, I'm just going to reuse the original leech pod. It can sit here in the torso pretty nicely. But in order to add some cyberpunk detailing, I'll add a tube going into the leech pod with this hose part. Then, I'll thread some Technic bushings onto this hose in one of my favorite techniques. With that popped into the chest, I can route the hose through a Technic connector. Then, to lock the pod in place, I can use this fin connector. To attach it, I'll build up a little Technic assembly. We can connect them in place and lock the pod in. Now, to add to the bat feel of this build, we can add some fur into the shoulders with these Hero Factory add-ons. I'll use a robot arm to attach the fur. A little pneumatic connector is the last thing I need in order to connect it in. We can do the same thing for the right side too. I've backed myself into a bit of a corner in terms of connection points for building up the hips. So, to give myself something to connect into, I'm going to build up this Technic assembly. For the actual hip connection, I'll use these modified lift arms and some pins. Then, some axles and half-thick lift arms can add the structure I need to attach this ball joint. I can connect that into the 2 connectors we previously added. I'll need someone in the comments to do the Lego math and make sure I'm not offending the purists or our Danish brick overlords with any stress on these parts. I think it's finally possible for us to attach the 2 floating assemblies together. I'll add lift arms and Technic cams to some axles before rounding out this critical assembly with a Hero Factory bone for the neck. As a rule, I don't do Lego math, I just see if it connects. Those axles look sufficiently parallel for me to just roll with it. I can also now connect in the other end of our tube. But first, I need to thread on some more bushings. Next, I'm building up some connector assemblies so that I can add some ball joints for the wings to connect to. I can attach them in and swing this bit around to lock them in securely. I need to add some ball joints for the shoulders too, but I also want to use these mask parts for the shoulder armor. I like that they conveniently have an opening for the wings to poke out from. Starting with a stopper axle, I'll add some ball joints and lift arms. Then, this double socket can house another ball joint so that I can connect the shoulder armor. Now, that assembly can connect into the torso. For the final bit of the torso, it's time to build up the hips. I'll start with a triaxle, which I can add a socket to. Then, I'll add in some lift arms. For the actual hip, I'll add a ball joint to a stopper axle, then another lift arm and connector. I can then lock them in place with a lift arm. To armor this up, I'll add clips and a lightsaber so that I can attach this mechanical armor. Then, these throwbot feet can round out the hips. For some more mechanical details, I'm going to add in these tubes. Next, let's connect it in to the torso and conveniently knock off this armor, allowing me to add some more tubes and then re-add the armor. To connect the other side of the tubes, I'll add in some connectors and pins. Then, for some final details on the back, I'll add in some more Hero Factory fur parts. And that completes our cyberpunk vampire torso. I can't stand the weight anymore, and neither can Antroz, so let's build him some legs. I'll start the feet by building out the toes, with these Technic connectors and robot hands. To that, I'll add a rod end and a spike. Then, let's clip 3 of them into this Hero Factory foot part. I'll add some additional stability to the foot with this rubber lift arm. For the upper legs, I'll start things off with these large double sockets, which I'll add a friction extender to. I want to have these large shell parts attached to one side. I'll attach it by using this rounded plate to connect a Technic connector. I'll lock it all together with these 2 long rods and another plate. Then, I'll add an axle to hold a ball joint that our shell will clip into. Afterwards, I'll add a throwbot foot and a hexagon. I'll clip some studs and half pins to this tile and then connect it in to continue the hexagon down. For the inside of the leg, I want to add some piston details. Since pistons and Bionicles go together like mud on pigs, I'll build them up with a clip and a rod end. Then, a rod and a red half pin can attach to a Technic tube. Afterwards, I'll attach 2 pistons to this bracket and connect it into the legs. I'll start building the knees with this cam, which I'll add some axles and ball joints to. I'm wanting to armor the knee, but I can't attach anything between the ball joints. So instead, let's use some brackets, which we can add a jumper and a slope to. Then, to attach them in, I'll use the pinhole in these Technic lift arms. For the shins, I want to use this throwbot head. I'll use a rod and this axle connector to allow the throwbot head to pivot so that I can attach it at an angle to this socket part. Then, I'll add an axle and a few cams. Another pair of pistons can connect to this Technic brick. We can attach the other side with a bar and a rod end on the leg, and some robot hands and a staff hilt on the pistons. Then, I'll connect a few more cams before I build up an ankle with a ball joint and some Technic details on this stopper axle. Up next, I want to add this corrugated tube. I'll attach one side here with a clip. And do some minor surgery to connect the other side with a newly added lift arm. For the other side of the calf, I'll use this car spoiler, then add a hexagon. I'll attach it in with a robot arm. And with that, the 2 leg halves can come together and we can add in the foot. One final touch I'd love to add is a stand so that I can pose Antroz in a flying position. I've built this up with a bunch of gray rock details, and a stand built from some clear Technic lift arms. I've added the rocks to the side of my base here with some snot bricks. We can build up a few more details together, starting with this light leech. Next, I'll construct a cute little Matoran head statue with this old school part. I'm adding some structure to the back here so that I can add a little flower detail. I'll attach that to the base, and we can move on to the next detail. Here, I'll construct a broken gear ring, which I can have overgrown with some plant details and another light leech. This ball joint that I added to the back lets me connect this into the base at whatever angle I want. And with that, the base is done, and it's time to assemble Antroz. First, I'll attach his head, and the cables coming from the back of it. Next, let's clip in the arms. Afterwards, I'll add the legs. The wings are the last appendage to connect. And finally, I'll give Antroz his signature blades. And we can move on to the beauty shots. Thanks to all the amazing people supporting me over on Patreon, and special shout out to my longtime patrons, Mum and Dad, Michael Frazier, Sam Kordestani, Baki, Brad Whitlock, and Kendra Phillips. You're the building blocks that make this channel possible. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this one too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, happy building.